What happens when you demand a black woman give up her seat, only to discover she's not just any passenger? On a high-speed train to Geneva, a world of privilege collides with quiet brilliance in a clash that goes viral. One woman dripping in designer labels believes her status gives her the right to dictate where others sit. The other, a woman of color in simple attire, holds a secret that is about to rock the world stage. Stay tuned for a story of shocking arrogance, a stunning revelation at the United Nations, and the devastating, inescapable karma that follows when you underestimate the person sitting opposite you. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the steel tracks was a soothing metronome, a sound Dr. Anya Sharma had always associated with progress and transition. The journey from London's St. Pancras International to Geneva's Gare de Cornavin was one she'd made several times a necessary pilgrimage for the rarefied world of high-level scientific discourse. Sunlight pale and soft as watered-down milk streamed through the panoramic windows of the first-class carriage, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Anya preferred the train to flying. It afforded her precious, uninterrupted hours to review her notes, to let her thoughts coalesce, before presenting them to some of the sharpest minds on the planet. She was dressed for comfort, not for Congress. A simple charcoal gray cashmere sweater, well worn but of good quality, was paired with black trousers and practical flat-soled boots. Her hair, a cascade of intricate braids, was tied back neatly at the nape of her neck. A pair of understated silver earrings was her only jewelry. On the polished table in front of her lay a leather-bound folio, its pages filled with complex equations and cosmological diagrams. Her laptop sat beside it, displaying a simulation of low-orbit satellite constellations, their digital paths weaving a complex tapestry around a shimmering blue globe. She was lost in the elegant mathematics of it all, a universe of pure logic and boundless possibility that was her sanctuary. The seat opposite her was empty, as was the one beside it. She had booked 2 seats to ensure she had the space for her work, a small but necessary luxury. The carriage was relatively quiet, a hushed cocoon of hushed conversations and the soft rustle of newspapers. It was an environment conducive to the deep concentration her work required. Her presentation at the United Nations International Telecommunication Union Conference was in 2 days. The topic, Orbital Dynamics and the Democratization of Information, Bridging the Global Digital Divide. It was the culmination of a decade of research, a proposal that could reshape global communications, bringing internet access to the most remote and impoverished corners of the world. It was her life's work. The train had made a brief stop at Ashford, and the gentle hiss of the pneumatic doors signaled the arrival of new passengers. Anya barely registered the subtle shift in the carriage's atmosphere until a shadow fell across her table. She looked up from her screen, her focus slowly returning to the immediate world. Standing before her was a woman who seemed to have stepped directly from the pages of a luxury lifestyle magazine. She was tall and slender, encased in a cream-colored pantsuit that must have cost more than Anya's first car. A silk scarf patterned with what looked like miniature golden chains was tied artfully around her neck. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a severe, immaculate bob that didn't move an inch. Diamonds glittered at her ears and on her fingers, catching the light with a cold, insistent fire. Her face was a mask of carefully applied makeup, her lips a slash of bold crimson. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume and impatience. Behind her stood a man, presumably her husband, looking harried and apologetic. He was holding 2 large suitcases and a designer handbag that the woman had evidently deemed too burdensome to carry herself. "Excuse me," the woman said. Her voice was crisp, laced with an accent that bespoke generations of inherited wealth and a lifetime of getting her own way. It wasn't a question, but a command for attention. Anya blinked, pulling her thoughts from the orbits of satellites back to the confines of the train carriage. "Yes. Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite, neutral. The woman, whose name was Caroline Preston, gestured with a dismissive flick of her wrist toward the empty seat beside Anya. "My husband and I have tickets for these seats. You'll have to move." Anya glanced at the seat number above her head, and then at the one beside her. They corresponded perfectly with the numbers on her e-ticket, which she had open on her phone. She held it up calmly. "I'm sorry, but I believe there's been a mistake. These are my seats, 3A and 3B. Caroline's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. She didn't even glance at the phone. It was as if the possibility that Anya could be correct was so remote, so utterly inconceivable, that it didn't warrant consideration. "That's not possible," she stated, her voice hardening. "Robert, show her our tickets." Her husband, Robert, fumbled in his jacket pocket, his face flushing a deep, uncomfortable red. He was a man accustomed to closing multi-million-dollar deals, but in the face of his wife's public assertiveness, he seemed to shrink. He produced their tickets, and indeed they were for a different carriage entirely. Carriage 7 seats 3A and 3B. They were in carriage 3. "Oh," Robert mumbled, looking at the tickets, and then at the carriage number displayed on the digital screen near the ceiling. "Darling, it seems we're in the wrong." "Nonsense," Caroline snapped, cutting him off before he could finish. She glared at Anya, her eyes narrowing. Her gaze swept over Anya's simple clothes, her braids, her laptop, and a sneer formed on her crimson lips. The calculus of her prejudice was swift and ugly. In her mind, the equation was simple. A woman like Anya could not possibly belong in a first-class seat she herself desired. "I'm sure you can find a seat elsewhere, perhaps in standard class, where you'll be more comfortable." The insinuation was as sharp and as cold as an icicle. It hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Several passengers nearby who had been pretending to read or look out the window shifted uncomfortably. The quiet hum of the carriage seemed to die down, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Anya felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest. It was an old and unwelcome sensation, the dull ache of being judged not by the content of her character or the power of her intellect, but by the color of her skin. For a moment she was tempted to unleash the fury that simmered just beneath her calm exterior. She could have dissected the woman's ignorance with the same clinical precision she applied to a flawed algorithm. She could have eviscerated her with a few well-chosen words. But she didn't. That was not her way. Reacting with anger would only validate the woman's distorted worldview. It would cede the moral high ground. Instead, she drew a slow, deliberate breath, anchoring herself in the vast, indifferent universe of her work. She was a scientist. She dealt in facts and evidence. "These are my seats," she repeated, her voice steady and clear, devoid of the anger Caroline was so clearly trying to provoke. "I paid for them. One for me and one for my work. I have a rather important presentation to prepare for." She gestured to her laptop and the folio of notes. "I'm afraid you will have to find your own seats in carriage 7. Caroline's face, already a mask of disdain, contorted into a sneer of pure disbelief. The idea that this woman would not immediately capitulate to her demand was an affront to her entire existence. "This is ridiculous. I am not walking to the other end of the train. You are in my seat. I am a first-class passenger, and I will not be treated this way." As am I, Anya said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of absolute conviction. The quiet authority in her tone seemed to momentarily unbalance Caroline. It was then that a young man sitting a few rows back, who had been watching the entire exchange over the top of his own laptop, discreetly angled his phone. He pressed the record button. His name was Ben Carter, a freelance journalist always on the lookout for a story. And he had a feeling this was going to be one for the ages. "Robert, do something!" Caroline hissed at her husband, her voice a venomous whisper that carried through the silent carriage. "Get the conductor. Have this woman removed." Robert Preston looked from his imperious wife to the implacably calm woman sitting before them. He looked at the other passengers, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. He wished the ground would swallow him whole, but his wife's will was a force of nature he had long ago learned not to resist. With a sigh of defeated resignation, he turned and went in search of authority, leaving Caroline to stand guard over the contested territory, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. The train sped on towards Geneva, a vessel carrying a collision of worlds, the sound of the wheels a countdown to a confrontation that was far from over. The return of Robert Preston with the train conductor in tow felt like the beginning of the second act in a rather unpleasant play. The conductor, a man named Mr. Henderson, was in his late 50s with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and a weary expression that suggested he had seen every possible permutation of human conflict within the confines of a railway carriage. His uniform was immaculate, a navy blue beacon of officialdom in the tense atmosphere. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice a practiced professional calm. He addressed the space between the two women, a diplomat entering a war zone. Caroline immediately seized the stage. "Yes, there is a significant problem," she announced, her voice resonating with theatrical urgency. "This woman is refusing to vacate our seats. My husband and I are exhausted from our travels, and we find this situation utterly unacceptable. We have paid a premium for this service." Mr. Henderson turned his gaze to Anya, one eyebrow raised in a silent query. Anya simply held up her phone again, displaying the ticket. "Conductor, these are my seats, 3A and 3B. I believe this couple's seats are in carriage 7. The conductor took the phone, his brow furrowing as he examined the digital ticket. He then looked at the paper tickets Robert Preston clutched in his hand. The discrepancy was obvious. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Caroline, his tone respectful but firm. "It appears your seats are indeed in the next carriage. There has been a misunderstanding." For Caroline, this was not a resolution. It was an escalation. The facts were an inconvenience, an obstacle to be bulldozed by the sheer force of her will. "A misunderstanding, I don't think so." "Look at her," she said, gesturing toward Anya with a contemptuous wave of her hand. "Does she look like she belongs here? I highly doubt she can afford one of these seats, let alone 2. She probably has a standard ticket and thought she could sneak in here and go unnoticed." The accusation, bald and racist, sucked the remaining air out of the carriage. Gasps were audible from nearby passengers. Ben Carter, the journalist, made sure his phone was still recording, capturing the raw, unfiltered ugliness of the moment. Mr. Henderson's professional demeanor faltered. A flicker of deep disapproval crossed his face. He was a working-class man, and while he was trained to be deferential to wealthy patrons, there was a line. Carolyn Preston had just sprinted across it. "Madam," he said, his voice now several degrees cooler, "this passenger has a valid first-class ticket for these seats. The matter is quite clear." "It's not clear to me." Carolyn's voice rose, shrill and piercing. "I am Mrs. Caroline Preston. My husband is Robert Preston, the CEO of Preston Global Investments. We are patrons of the arts philanthropists. We donate significant sums to humanitarian causes. Do you have any idea who we are?" The name-dropping was a tactical blunder. Instead of inspiring awe, it reeked of desperation and entitlement. Robert Preston visibly winced, looking as if he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. He tried to place a placating hand on his wife's arm, but she shook it off angrily. "My identity and my husband's professional standing have no bearing on the validity of my train ticket," Anya stated, her voice cutting through Caroline's tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. She hadn't moved. Her hands rested calmly on her folio. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, meeting Caroline's furious stare without a hint of intimidation. It was this composure, this refusal to be rattled, that seemed to infuriate Caroline the most. "I want to see her ticket," Caroline demanded, pointing a diamond-clad finger at Anya. "A real ticket? Not something on a phone that could be easily forged. And I want you to check her identification." Mr. Henderson was now in an impossible position. Company policy dictated that he de-escalate, but Mrs. Preston was a VIP, the kind of customer whose complaints could travel all the way to the corporate headquarters and have serious repercussions for his career. He was trapped between protocol and privilege. He hesitated, his gaze shifting between the two women. "Ma'am," he said to Anya, his tone apologetic, "would you mind, just to resolve this, showing me some identification that matches the name on the ticket?" Anya held his gaze for a long moment. She could have refused. She would have been within her rights to do so. It was a humiliating request born of another's prejudice. But she saw the corner the conductor had been backed into. She saw the other passengers watching, waiting. And she realized that complying was the quickest way to end this farce and return to her work. It was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag, retrieved her wallet, and produced her driver's license. She handed it to Mr. Henderson. He took it, his relief palpable. He compared the name on the license, Dr. Anya Sharma, with the name on the e-ticket. They matched perfectly. "Thank you, Dr. Sharma," he said, handing the license back to her with a nod of respect. The use of her title was deliberate, a small but significant act of validation. "As you can see, Mrs. Preston, everything is in order. Dr. Sharma is exactly where she is supposed to be." He then turned to Caroline, his professionalism now a rigid shield. "I can escort you and your husband to your seats in carriage 7. I'm sure you'll find them quite comfortable." It was a final, undeniable checkmate. The facts had won. Caroline Preston stood there, her face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. She had deployed every weapon in her arsenal, her status, her wealth, her condescension, her thinly veiled racism, and all of them had failed. She had tried to paint Anya as an imposter, a fraud, and in the end it was she who was exposed. Defeated but not chastened, she shot Anya a look of pure venom. "This is not over," she muttered, a promise and a threat. She then spun on her heel, her expensive suit swishing with her indignant exit, and stormed down the aisle without a backward glance. Her husband Robert offered Anya a mortified, helpless shrug before scurrying after his wife, dragging their luggage behind him like a burden of shame. The tension in the carriage broke. There was a collective exhale, a rustle of movement as people returned to their own worlds. Mr. Henderson gave Anya another apologetic nod before continuing his duties. Anya simply took a deep breath, opened her folio, and tried to find her way back to the elegant dance of satellites. But the ugliness of the encounter lingered a discordant note in the symphony of her thoughts. Outside the window, the French countryside blurred into a green and gold tapestry, oblivious to the small, bitter drama that had just played out within the speeding train. For nearly an hour, a fragile peace settled over carriage 3. The departure of the Prestons had left a vacuum filled now by the familiar comforting sounds of the train. Anya did her best to re-engage with her work, but the residue of the confrontation was a sticky film on her concentration. The woman's words, the conductor's hesitation, the silent judgment of the other passengers, it was a microcosm of a battle she had fought her entire life. She tried to channel her frustration into her work, to use it as fuel. Her project was about connection, about breaking down barriers. The incident was a stark, ugly reminder of just how high those barriers could be. The quiet was broken by the approach of a man from the opposite end of the carriage. He was in his early 60s, with a mane of distinguished silver hair and a face that spoke of late nights spent poring over diplomatic cables. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried himself with an air of quiet authority that was innate, not performed. He stopped by Anya's seat, a warm, apologetic smile on his face. "Dr. Sharma, forgive me for intruding," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "My name is Richard Sterling. I couldn't help but overhear that unfortunate exchange earlier, and I felt compelled to come and offer my sincerest apologies for that woman's deplorable behavior. It was a disgrace." Anya looked up, surprised. She hadn't noticed him before. He had an aura of importance, but it was understated, carried with ease. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That's very kind of you. Please call me Richard," he insisted. He paused, his eyes twinkling with recognition. "I must confess I'm something of an admirer of your work. I read your paper in the Journal of Applied Physics on signal propagation through the ionosphere. Absolutely brilliant. Groundbreaking stuff." Anya was taken aback. It was one thing to be recognized at a conference, but to be approached by a stranger on a train who was familiar with her published research was rare. "You're a physicist?" she asked, intrigued. Richard chuckled, a deep, pleasant sound. "Good heavens, no. My grasp of quantum mechanics is tenuous at best. I'm a diplomat, British ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva. My field is international relations, but a large part of my portfolio involves technology and development. Your work on creating a global low-cost satellite network is not just scientifically brilliant, it's geopolitically revolutionary." The revelation of his identity hung in the air for a moment. Ambassador Richard Sterling. Anya had seen his name on correspondence related to the conference. He was a major figure, a man who wielded considerable influence. The fact that he not only recognized her, but was a vocal supporter of her research, was a significant and unexpected development. "I'm hoping to hear you speak at the ITU conference," he continued, his tone warm and genuine. "Your keynote is the main reason I'm heading back to Geneva a day early. The proposal you've outlined could solve some of the most intractable problems we face in global education and economic disparity. It's what diplomacy should be all about, using innovation to build a better, more connected world." As they spoke, a movement at the end of the aisle caught their attention. Caroline Preston was returning. She had evidently been stewing in carriage 7 and had decided she needed something from the dining car, which required her to pass through carriage 3 again. Her face was still set in a mask of grim fury. She saw Anya, and her eyes narrowed. Then she saw the distinguished, impeccably dressed man engaged in an animated, friendly conversation with her. She couldn't hear their words, but she could read the body language. The deference, the admiration in the man's posture as he spoke to Anya was unmistakable. Caroline's expression shifted from anger to confusion. This didn't fit her narrative. In her world, important men did not speak with such respect to women like Anya. She began to walk toward them, a new strategy forming in her mind. Perhaps this man didn't know who Anya was. Perhaps he was simply being polite. She could use this. She could reassert her social standing, and perhaps salvage some of her wounded pride by aligning herself with him. As she drew level with the seats, Ambassador Sterling glanced up, his friendly expression vanishing, replaced by a look of glacial disapproval. He recognized her instantly from the earlier confrontation. "Ah, Mrs. Preston," I believe he said, his voice dripping with ice. He did not smile. He did not offer his hand. He simply stood there, a formidable barrier between her and Anya. Caroline was momentarily thrown off by his cold reception and the fact that he knew her name. Yes, she stammered. "Caroline Preston. And you are—" She was trying to regain control to place him within her social hierarchy. "Richard Sterling," he replied flatly. The name clearly meant nothing to Caroline, which only seemed to annoy her further. "Well, Mr. Sterling, I hope this woman hasn't been bothering you with some sob story." The ambassador's eyes hardened. On the contrary, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I was just telling Dr. Sharma what an immense honor it is to share a carriage with her. Her work is of vital importance to the international community. In fact, many of us at the UN consider her one of the most important scientific minds of our generation. We are all eagerly awaiting her keynote address." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then looked directly into Caroline's eyes, his gaze unwavering. "You, on the other hand, madam, owe this distinguished scientist an apology for your disgraceful conduct. Your behavior was an embarrassment not only to yourself, but to every other passenger on this train." The public rebuke, delivered with the full weight of his diplomatic authority, was devastating. It was a verbal slap in the face, sharp and humiliating. Caroline's face went from pale to crimson in a matter of seconds. She opened her mouth to retort, to defend herself, but no words came out. She was utterly outmaneuvered, her social status rendered meaningless against the combined force of genuine intellectual achievement and established diplomatic power. She stood there speechless and exposed the entire carriage her audience. Ben Carter, the journalist, captured the entire exchange, the camera on his phone perfectly steady. This was better than he could have ever imagined. Defeated for a second time, Caroline turned without another word and fled back toward carriage 7, her retreat far more hurried and less dignified than the first. Richard Sterling watched her go, his expression grim. He then turned back to Anya, his warm smile returning. "I do apologize for that, Doctor. Some people inhabit a world so small they cannot conceive of the universe beyond it." Anya finally allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Ambassador." "Truly." "Richard, please," he insisted again. "Now, before I let you get back to your work, I have to ask you about the Kessler syndrome implications of your proposed constellation density." He pulled up the empty chair beside her, and the two of them fell into a deep technical conversation. Anya felt the last of the tension from the confrontation melt away, replaced by the familiar comfort of intellectual engagement. For the rest of the journey to Geneva, she was no longer a target of prejudice, but a respected peer, a brilliant mind recognized by an unexpected and powerful ally. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. The remainder of the train journey passed in a blur of stimulating conversation. Ambassador Sterling, it turned out, was not just a fan of Anya's work, but was deeply knowledgeable about the technical and political hurdles her project faced. They discussed everything from spectrum allocation and orbital debris mitigation to the challenges of securing international cooperation. For Anya, it was an invigorating prelude to the conference, a chance to spar intellectually with someone who understood the global implications of her research. The ugly incident with Caroline Preston faded into the background, a trivial annoyance overshadowed by a profound and promising new connection. As the train glided into Geneva's Gare de Cornavin, the majestic sight of the Jet d'Eau fountain erupting from the lake greeted them. The city was a picture of serene efficiency, a global hub of diplomacy and finance nestled amongst the breathtaking Alps. The air that hit them as they stepped onto the platform was crisp and cool, a clean slate. Ambassador Sterling insisted on arranging for his own car to take Anya to her hotel. "It's the least I can do," he said, waving away her protests. "Besides, it gives us a few more minutes to discuss how to handle the delegation from China. They're skeptical about data sovereignty." As Anya's luggage was loaded into the sleek black sedan, she caught a glimpse of the Prestons on the platform. They were arguing. Carolyn was gesticulating wildly, her face a mask of rage, while Robert stood stone-faced, his posture radiating defeat. They were a portrait of gilded misery, their wealth a poor shield against the consequences of their own arrogance. Anya felt a fleeting moment of something akin to pity, not for them, but for the emptiness that must lie at the core of a life so defined by prejudice and status. Then she dismissed them from her mind. They were irrelevant. Her hotel, the Beau Rivage Genève, was a palace of old-world elegance overlooking the lake. The UN had arranged the accommodation a testament to her status as a keynote speaker. After checking in, she spent the rest of the day in her suite, not admiring the view, but refining her speech. She walked the length of the room, practicing her delivery timing, her pauses ensuring every word, every slide, every data point was perfect. Her presentation wasn't just a collection of facts, it was a narrative. It told the story of a young girl in a small town who fell in love with the stars, who saw in their distant light a promise of connection. It wove together complex physics with a deeply humanistic vision. She spoke of a world where a child in a remote African village could access the same educational resources as a child in Silicon Valley, where a farmer in rural India could get real-time crop data, where disaster relief could be coordinated with pinpoint accuracy. Her satellite network was the tool, but the goal was empathy, understanding, and shared progress. It was a speech designed to appeal not just to the head, but to the heart. Meanwhile, across the city, Caroline Preston was nursing her wounded pride with a bottle of overpriced champagne in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons Hotel des Bergues. The encounter on the train had been a public relations disaster of the most personal kind. She had been publicly humiliated not once, but twice. Her husband, Robert, had been little help. He had spent the afternoon on the phone with his office trying to placate her with promises of a shopping spree at Rue du Rhône. "I cannot believe the nerve of that man," she fumed, pacing the lavishly decorated suite. "And that woman sitting there so smugly. Who does she think she is, darling?" "Please let it go," Robert sighed, loosening his tie. "It was an unfortunate incident. We'll attend the opening reception tonight. You'll wear your new gown and we'll forget all about it." "Forget about it," she shrieked. "Robert, our company Preston Global just made a $10 million philanthropic pledge to the UN's Digital Inclusion Initiative. We are supposed to be honored guests at this conference. We are patrons. And I was treated like some common tourist by a jumped-up civil servant and some person in coach." Robert knew better than to point out that Anya was in first class. "The ambassador didn't know who you were," he said wearily. "It's over. Let's focus on the conference. This pledge is important for the company's image. It's good PR." Caroline stopped pacing. Her eyes narrowed. "Yes, it is, and I will not have it ruined. Tomorrow, at the opening plenary, I will be sitting in the front row. I will look radiant, and I will be the very picture of philanthropy and grace. No one will remember the train. They will only remember the generosity of the Prestons." Her resolve hardened into a diamond-sharp point. She would reclaim her narrative. She would use her wealth and status to erase the memory of her humiliation. The United Nations conference would not be her shame. It would be her stage. She had no idea how right she was. That evening, Ben Carter, the journalist, sat in his modest hotel room reviewing the footage on his phone. The audio was crystal clear. Caroline's sneering condescension, Mr. Henderson's professional distress, Anya's unshakable calm, and Ambassador Sterling's decisive intervention. It was all there. It was a potent, self-contained drama. He knew he had a viral story on his hands. The headline wrote itself, "Wealthy CEO's Wife Demands Black Woman Move from First-Class Seat, Harangues Conductor." It was a perfect storm of class, race, and entitlement. He could sell it to any number of online outlets, and it would explode. But something gave him pause. The ambassador had called the woman Dr. Sharma. He'd mentioned a keynote address. A quick search on the ITU conference schedule confirmed it. Dr. Anya Sharma, the guest of honor. The main event. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a racist encounter on a train. It was about something bigger. The cosmic irony was almost too perfect to be real. The woman Caroline had tried to eject from first class was in fact the most important person heading to the very event the Prestons were attending as mere high-paying donors. Ben smiled. He wouldn't release the video yet. The story was still unfolding. The real climax wasn't on the train. It was going to be in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Palais des Nations. He would wait. He would let the final act play out. The karma he suspected would be far more satisfying that way. The Assembly Hall at the Palais des Nations was a cathedral of international diplomacy. Its soaring Art Deco ceiling arched over tiered rows of seats, each equipped with a microphone and translation headset. A vast mural depicting the struggle for peace covered the wall behind the imposing marble rostrum. The air itself seemed thick with the weight of history, echoing with the ghosts of speeches that had shaped the modern world. It was a space designed to humble, to inspire a sense of collective responsibility. Caroline Preston, however, was not humbled. She was triumphant, dressed in a vibrant fuchsia dress that stood out like a tropical flower in a sea of sober business suits. She navigated the pre-session mingling with the predatory grace of a shark. She held a glass of champagne, her smile wide and dazzling, her laughter a little too loud. Her husband Robert trailed in her wake, looking vaguely uncomfortable, but playing his part. They were the picture of magnanimous patrons, accepting thanks from various delegates for their company's generous donation. The incident on the train was a distant, unpleasant memory she had successfully repressed. Today was her redemption. Their seats were in the third row, a prime position befitting their donor status. Caroline settled into the plush chair, surveying the hall with a proprietary air. She recognized several powerful people: ministers, tech billionaires, heads of NGOs. She nodded to a few, bestowing her acknowledgement like a blessing. This was her world. These were her people. She belonged here. A few rows behind them, Ben Carter found a seat with a clear view of both the stage and the Prestons. He had his professional camera with him today, disguised as a standard attendee's device. He was ready. Ambassador Richard Sterling was seated in the front row, in the section reserved for high-level diplomats. He saw Anya slip quietly into a reserved seat in the wings just off stage. He gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. She returned it with a small, grateful smile. She looked different today. She wore a tailored sapphire blue dress that was both professional and elegant. Her braids were styled in a sophisticated updo. She radiated a quiet confidence that was more powerful than any overt display of status. She was not there to be seen. She was there to be heard. The lights in the hall dimmed. The low murmur of hundreds of conversations died down. A hush fell over the assembly. The Secretary General of the ITU, a distinguished Swiss diplomat named Dr. Klaus Richter, strode to the rostrum. "Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Welcome to the opening plenary of the 2025 Global Conference on Communication and Development. We are here today to discuss the most pressing challenge of our time: how to build a truly inclusive and equitable global digital society." He spoke for several minutes, outlining the conference's goals. Caroline listened with half an ear, more interested in scanning the audience for familiar faces. Robert tapped nervously on the armrest of his chair, his mind on his company's stock price. "Our challenges are great," Dr. Richter continued, his voice resonating with passion. "But so too is our capacity for innovation. We need bold ideas, new perspectives. We need visionaries who can not only dream of a better future, but can also build it. It is for this reason that we are so deeply honored to have our keynote speaker with us today." Carolyn perked up. This was the main event. She wondered who it would be. Probably some aging male tech guru from Silicon Valley or a European politician. "Our speaker is a true pioneer," Dr. Richter announced. "A brilliant astrophysicist whose work is set to redefine the very fabric of global communication. Her research at the intersection of cosmology and information theory has paved the way for a revolutionary approach to satellite technology, one that promises to bring knowledge and opportunity to the billions of people currently left behind in the digital darkness. It is my profound honor and personal pleasure to introduce the mind behind the Stell Array Constellation Project, Dr. Anya Sharma." The name hit Caroline Preston like a physical blow. For a split second, her brain refused to process the information. It couldn't be. It was a different Dr. Sharma. A coincidence. But then Anya walked out from the wings and onto the world stage. She moved with an easy grace, her expression calm and focused. The entire hall, hundreds of the world's most powerful and influential people, erupted in applause. They rose to their feet in a wave of respect and anticipation. Ambassador Sterling was on his feet, clapping enthusiastically. Carolyn remained frozen in her seat. The blood drained from her face. Her champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound lost in the thunderous ovation. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with a horror that was almost comical in its intensity. It was her, the woman from the train, the woman she had dismissed, insulted, and tried to have removed, the woman she had accused of not belonging in first class. That woman was standing on the stage of the United Nations, being introduced as one of the most brilliant minds of her generation. Robert Preston looked at his wife, then at the stage, and then back at his wife. The dawning comprehension on his face was a slow-motion car crash of panic and disbelief. He grabbed Caroline's arm, but she was rigid, a statue of pure shock. Ben Carter had his camera focused squarely on Caroline's face, capturing every fleeting micro-expression of her world collapsing. The sneer of disbelief, the flicker of confusion, the dawning horror, and the final crushing wave of humiliation. It was pure, uncut karma, and it was spectacular. Anya reached the rostrum. She placed her notes on the stand and looked out at the vast assembly. Her eyes, calm and intelligent, swept across the hall. For a fleeting moment, her gaze passed over the third row, over the woman in the fuchsia dress, who now seemed to be shrinking into her seat. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of triumph. There was only the quiet, focused intensity of a woman who was exactly where she was supposed to be, ready to share her vision with the world. the world that Caroline had tried to deny her a small piece of just 24 hours earlier. The applause finally subsided. A profound silence fell over the hall. Dr. Anya Sharma leaned into the microphone to begin her speech, and Caroline Preston wished the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. We look up at the night sky. Anya began, her voice clear and steady, filling the vast hall without effort. It was a voice accustomed to lecturing, to explaining the complex with elegant simplicity. And we see a canvas of infinite distance. We see the past in light that has traveled for millions of years to reach us. For centuries we have seen it as a void that separates us. But I am here today to tell you that we have been looking at it the wrong way. The sky is not a barrier. It is a bridge. She clicked a remote, and the massive screen behind her lit up with a stunning animated graphic of the Earth wrapped in the delicate lattice-like web of her proposed satellite constellation. Caroline Preston heard the words, but they were just noise. A roaring in her ears blocked all comprehension. Her mind was a maelstrom of shame and panic. She could feel the stares of the people around her, even if they weren't looking. It was the phantom sensation of being judged, the same feeling she had so casually tried to inflict on Anya. She felt a desperate urge to run, to flee the hall, but her limbs were made of lead. She was pinned to her seat by the sheer gravitational force of her own mortification. Anya's speech was masterful. She didn't just present data, she told a story. She spoke of the power of a single piece of information, a weather forecast for a farmer, a medical diagnosis for a remote clinic, an online lesson for a child who had never seen a school. She made the abstract tangible. We live in an age of unprecedented division, she said, her gaze sweeping the audience. We build walls both literal and digital. We retreat into bubbles of belief, suspicious of those who are different. We allow superficialities, the way someone looks, the way they dress, where we think they belong, to obscure our shared humanity. As she spoke these words, she made fleeting eye contact with Ambassador Sterling in the front row. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. It was a shared acknowledgement. She wasn't going to mention the incident on the train. She didn't need to. The theme was woven into the very fabric of her message. Her speech was her response, delivered not to an arrogant passenger in a train carriage, but to the entire world. This technology, she continued, gesturing to the screen, is not merely about bandwidth and latency. It is about empathy. It is about creating a global nervous system that allows us to feel what others feel, to know what others know. It is about dismantling the ignorance that breeds prejudice. When you can speak face-to-face with someone on the other side of the planet, it becomes much harder to demonize them. When you have access to the same library of human knowledge, it becomes much harder to believe the lies that are used to divide us. Robert Preston was sweating. He wasn't listening to the words, but he understood the context. He understood the cataclysm that was unfolding for his family and his company. He had built Preston Global's reputation on a carefully cultivated image of progressive philanthropy. His $10 million pledge was a cornerstone of that image. And now, his wife had become the living embodiment of the very prejudice this keynote speaker was so eloquently denouncing. The hypocrisy was staggering. In his seat further back, Ben Carter knew this was the moment. The speech provided the perfect damning context for his video. He discreetly transferred the video file from his phone to his laptop. He typed out a short, factual description. Caroline Preston, wife of Preston Global CEO Robert Preston, filmed verbally harassing renowned astrophysicist Dr. Anya Sharma on a train to a UN conference where Sharma was the keynote speaker. He added a few relevant tags: UN Preston Global Entitlement Karma. He attached the video file. His finger hovered over the send button, his email addressed to a contact at a major international news wire. Anya was reaching her conclusion. "The universe does not discriminate," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "The laws of physics are the same for everyone. Gravity pulls on the rich and the poor alike. The speed of light is constant whether you are in a palace or a slum. Perhaps it is time our own societies learned from that lesson. Let us build a world that is as open, as connected, and as universal as the cosmos itself. Thank you." The entire hall rose to its feet in a sustained, thunderous standing ovation. It was more than just polite applause. It was a genuine emotional response to a powerful and inspiring vision. Delegates were cheering, some had tears in their eyes. Anya simply smiled, gave a slight bow, and walked off the stage as Dr. Richter returned to the rostrum looking visibly moved. Ben Carter hit send. The fallout was instantaneous. In the world of digital news, a story like this travels at the speed of light. Within minutes, the video was being downloaded by news agencies around the globe. The first alerts began pinging on the phones of journalists and delegates right there in the hall. Robert Preston's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hand trembling. It was a news alert from a major financial publication. The headline was "Stark Video Wife of CEO Robert Preston in Racist Tirade Against UN Keynote Speaker Dr. Anya Sharma." He clicked the link. The video was there. It was raw, undeniable, and utterly damning. He could hear his wife's shrill voice, her entitled demands, her racist insinuations. He watched the calm, dignified responses from Dr. Sharma. He saw the mortified conductor, the disapproving ambassador. He saw himself, weak and ineffectual, scurrying away. He looked at his wife. She was still staring blankly at the now empty stage, oblivious to the digital tsunami that was at that very moment tearing her world apart. The applause for Dr. Sharma was the soundtrack to their social and professional demise. The speech was over, but for the Prestons, the reckoning had just begun. The virus had been released. Before the standing ovation for Dr. Sharma had even fully subsided, the digital world was on fire. The video Ben Carter had released spread through the conference hall, first passed from phone to phone in whispers and shocked glances. Delegates who had moments before been shaking Robert Preston's hand and congratulating him on his company's philanthropy now avoided his gaze, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. By the time the Prestons stumbled out of the assembly hall, the story was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Preston Global and Caroline Preston were hashtags of infamy. News vans were already scrambling to get to the Palais des Nations. Robert's phone was vibrating incessantly with calls from his board of directors, his PR team, and his terrified lawyers. Each buzz was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Caroline was still in a state of shock, unable to grasp the speed and scale of the disaster. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice small and bewildered as Robert dragged her through the marble corridors, shielding her from the curious stares. "You've ruined us, Caroline!" he hissed, his voice tight with a fury he had suppressed for years. "You've single-handedly destroyed everything I've spent my life building with one act of stupid, arrogant prejudice." The aftermath was brutal and swift. The stock of Preston Global Investments plummeted in after-hours trading. The board convened an emergency meeting and demanded Robert's immediate resignation. His carefully constructed empire, built on a fiction of social responsibility, crumbled in a matter of hours. The $10 million pledge to the UN was publicly rejected by the ITU, with Dr. Richter issuing a scathing statement condemning the behavior seen in the video, which stands in direct opposition to the values of inclusivity and respect that this institution was founded upon. Corporate partners and clients began to sever ties. Other philanthropic organizations that bore the Preston name announced they were renaming their buildings and returning donations. Caroline became a social pariah overnight. Friends stopped answering her calls. Invitations were rescinded. She was unceremoniously removed from the boards of the charities she had once lorded over. The world she had so carefully curated, a world that revolved around her and validated her sense of superiority, had vanished. She was left with nothing but her expensive clothes and the crushing weight of public shame. Anya Sharma, meanwhile, was largely insulated from the ensuing chaos. She was whisked from the plenary hall into a series of high-level meetings with ambassadors, tech executives, and heads of state, all eager to learn more about her project and pledge their support. The incident on the train and the viral video that followed only served to amplify her message and elevate her status. She was no longer just a brilliant scientist, she was a symbol. She was the calm, dignified embodiment of grace under pressure, a living testament to the very ideals she had espoused on stage. A week later, a chastened and broken Robert Preston, having been forced out of his own company, issued a public apology. It was a pathetic, lawyer-vetted statement full of hollow regret. As part of a desperate attempt to salvage some shred of his legacy, he announced he was personally liquidating $20 million in assets to establish a new foundation. The foundation's sole purpose would be to provide scholarships for women of color in STEM fields. He humbly requested that the foundation be administered by a board of their choosing, and he extended an invitation to Dr. Anya Sharma to serve as its honorary chairperson. Anya received the offer via an email from Robert Preston's attorneys. She read it in her office at the university, the faint glow of a star chart illuminating her face. She considered the offer for a long moment. It was blood money, a penance born of desperation, not genuine remorse. But she also saw the potential. $20 million could change hundreds of lives. It could fund the education of the next generation of scientists, the next Anya Sharmas. She typed her reply. She politely declined the honorary chairperson position, stating that her research required her full attention. However, she accepted the donation on behalf of a consortium of educational charities she trusted. She would ensure the money was used as intended, but she would not allow her name to be used to launder the Prestons' reputation. Her final sentence was simple and direct. I hope that in the future, you will come to value inclusion not as a matter of public relations, but as a matter of basic human decency. She sent the email and turned back to her work. On her screen, a simulation of her satellite constellation was running. Thousands of tiny lights blinked in sequence, weaving their web of connection around the globe. The drama with the Prestons, the viral video, the public fallout, it all seemed so small, so terrestrial. That night she went to the university observatory. She stood under the vast open dome, the cool night air on her skin. Above her, the cosmos wheeled in silent, majestic splendor. The stars didn't care about class or color. They didn't know the name Caroline Preston. They simply burned, broadcasting their light across unimaginable distances, connecting the universe in a web of fundamental forces. Anya looked up at the constellations, at the infinite possibilities glittering in the darkness. She had faced a moment of profound ignorance and had responded not with anger, but with brilliance. The karma that had struck the Prestons was not of her making. It was a natural consequence, a law of the social universe as immutable as gravity. Their world had shrunk to the size of their own prejudice, while hers had expanded to encompass the stars. And she had more bridges to build. That's the incredible story of Dr. Anya Sharma, and the day arrogance collided with destiny at 300 kilometers per hour. It's a powerful reminder that a person's worth is not defined by their clothes or the seat they occupy, but by the content of their character and the power of their vision. The universe has a funny way of balancing the scales, and as the Prestons learned, karma can be as swift and as devastating as a stock market crash. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of dignity and the inevitability of justice, please help us share it. Hit that like button so more people can see it. Share this video with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of incredible people and unforgettable moments of sweet, sweet karma. Thank you for listening.